Welcome to Releasing Trauma, a Survivor's Podcast. I am your host, Tracy Osborne. I am a survivor of emotional bullying, rape, sexual assault, domestic abuse, and grief. After losing my husband in 2019, I set off on a new adventure to help other women release their trauma and create a life they can cherish. Each week, I will feature a guest expert or a survivor to share their stories, tips, wisdom, and more. The goal is so that you can take away even just the smallest nugget of information you can use in your life right now to make a change, and to remind you that you're not alone. There is life after trauma, and you can move from victim to thriver and create a life you can cherish. Hi, everybody. Welcome to another episode of Releasing Trauma. I am your host, Tracy Osborne. With me today is Chandra Moyer, and we are going to be talking about healing repressed trauma, which is it's kind of hard to do when it's repressed, but it's very important because it is stuff that we're holding on to. So, Chandra, thank you so much for coming on the show today.
Well, thank you for having me. I'm excited to be here.
This is an exciting topic because it's not one that I normally talk about, repressed trauma. And it's something that I think we do as survivors to protect ourselves.
Mm-hmm. I agree.
So it's a great topic for us to get into. But first, like I always start out the show, let's hear a little bit about you. Tell us a little bit about your backstory.
Well, I'm an author, life coach, and speaker, and also survivor incest. And I recently published my new book, and I'll share about that later. Okay. And my healing journey really started in my mid-30s when a trauma awakened memories of sexual abuse. It was like the first time in my adult life where I felt powerless, helpless, and frightened. And that trauma triggered my first flashback. And basically about a month after that trauma, it triggered a flashback. And I was just reading the other day, which I found it interesting, how they say, memory, when we recall memories, it's often in the context of things. So it was interesting that my first flashback happened when I was living in Hawaii, and my trauma happened in the Philippines. And since my childhood, I had never lived in a tropical place. So when I moved to Hawaii in my adult life, it was the first time I began to smell, like the sugarcane burning, the fields burning, the sights and sounds, which were similar to the Philippines. Mm-hmm. So I think that was part of it, along with the trigger. And when I had the flashback, I was just going to lie down for a nap. I had young kids at the time. I had a 2-year-old and a 6-year-old. And sometimes I need those midday naps, right? So I was going to lie down and my husband was at home. And as I was laying down, all of a sudden I felt like I was transported back in time. That's the only way I can describe it. And I felt small, like I was 6 years old again. And I felt I was frozen. I couldn't move. My body just froze. And I felt terrified. And I felt like somebody was coming into the room to do something terrible to me. And I was in that state maybe like 15 minutes or so. And when my body started to thaw out and I was able to get up, I was still very groggy. And I went downstairs to my husband and I just said, I think something terrible happened to me, but I just can't remember. And all this emotion just kind of erupted out of my gut and I started sobbing. Mm-hmm. So that was like my first kind of clue, something. But then life happened and we moved and we adopted another baby. And it wasn't until a couple more years later that my memories really began to start flooding back. And, when you thought you lived a certain life, like I thought I had lived a certain life. If you had met me back then, I would have said I was raised in a wonderful family, perfect family, perfect home. My parents were always there for me. I had created this narrative in order to survive. Right. And so when you have these memories that come flooding back that you have no recall, it really rocks your foundation. The person you thought you were, you're not. And you keep asking yourself, am I making this up? Am I making this up? How could I forget something so important? But you do. The brain I feel, is an incredible mechanism. I feel like it's a gift from God, I'll be honest, that I was able to compartmentalize, to dissociate, to have the parts to cope in order to survive.
Right.
So I was diagnosed with PTSD and dissociative amnesia back then. So that's kind of like what started my healing journey. As I said, started.
I don't know that we ever truly end our healing journeys.
Right. I agree. It's a continuum, right?
Yeah.
It's a continual process. And, when that happens, like I've been able to mentor some other young women. I'm more seasoned now in age wise. And I, encourage them, because when you're going through it, you feel like it's never going to end. You feel like the pain is so consuming. You just think you're never going to make it. And the pain does not last forever, but you do have to go through the process if you want it resolved.
True.
And right. And so it's easy to say, I just want to get over this. That was my thing. I just want to get over this quickly, and get on to the next thing, my personality and everything. Well, there's some things we can't rush. And these are one of those times that I couldn't rush. And the thing is too, like, I don't know why I thought I could handle all that, all the memories coming back at one time. Well, you really can't. It's just overload, because you've got your body memories. I had body memories that came. I had nightmares, night terrors. I had just, so, and they come back in bits and pieces. So when a memory comes, you don't get the whole memory. And I was on another podcast, and I thought the lady just described it so well. She said, when we're traumatized, it tears us apart, right?
Right.
And so we are splintered, we're shattered, we're fragmented, right? So why do we think when the memories come back, they would come back whole? Because we were not traumatized in whole. We were traumatized in bits and pieces. So when the memories return and come back, they come back fragmented. They come back a piece here. And it's like putting a puzzle piece together. And that takes time, especially it's one of those gigantic puzzle pieces.
Right. 1,000-piece puzzle.
1,000-piece puzzle. So,
and they're all the same color.
Right. Oh my gosh.
Different hues, or different light and darkness of the same color.
Right. So yeah.
Wow.
So it was a journey, and and we don't heal in a vacuum, right? Or we don't go through this in a vacuum. I was married, had 2 children at the time, or 3. The baby came. And so my husband went through it with me. And I had fictionalized my childhood, or however you want to say it. The way I, when I finally came forward with the stuff, he would say to me, well, you painted this perfect childhood, but I never saw this mother you said you had. The mother I met was nothing like this woman you talked about. So, so it was just really interesting, right? The lengths that will go to survive. Because what does a child do if they're living in a home? We had, my dad was alcoholic, it was domestic violence. We were a military family. And the abuse started very young. I was a toddler, about a year and a half, went until I was 16. So where does a child go when they're being traumatized or sexually assaulted? You can't run, so you dissociate.
Right.
So that was my coping mechanism. And I'm grateful for the wonderful counselor I had. Now, I will say that I would highly recommend anyone listening, if they're having something like this and they're not sure, to see a therapist, because they can be a godsend. I mean, I'm so grateful. I waited too long to see a therapist. I did not have that modeling. No one in my family went to therapy. It's just one day it got so bad. My husband just looked at me and said, "You got to get your ass some help." He was at his wit's end.
That's funny.
He was at his wit's end, and I have a gentle giant of a husband. Excuse me. And so when he gets to that point, he's very patient and loving. So I finally went to therapy, but not without wrestling, because in my mind, that is perceived as someone being weak to ask for help. And I had positioned myself all these years as a strong person. I rarely asked for help. And now I was, just kind of disintegrating into this little puddle, So I did need help. And I went to an intensive 8-day retreat, a therapeutic retreat. And it was like about 6 months worth of counseling. They had counselors and everything there. And then I had my own therapist I was working with. And sometimes my sessions would be 2 hours because sometimes a part would surface, a child, and we'd have to work with that little person, that part of you that's broken, who has the memories. And until I was able to establish a relationship with, I call her little one, with little one, I didn't have access to the traumatic memories. She held the memories.
Okay. That makes sense.
Right. And so I'll never forget the day my therapist said to me, because I could literally feel it was the weirdest thing, thank God for good therapists, because you do feel like you're going crazy. And I said to her, "Oh my gosh, I feel like there's someone waking up inside of me." And she feels very young. And when she wakes up, my heart is racing. But then I can feel her going back to sleep. So my therapist said, she says, that's one of those parts that is carrying the trauma. And she just recommended that it was a beautiful thing. She says, just get one of your son's teddy bears and rock the teddy bear in the rocking chair with you and start talking to her and letting her know that you're there, that you believe her and that she's safe. Oh. And it's when she felt safe and the trust was developed that she would come forward. And I would just journal what she was saying. Journaling was a tool for me. And I would just journal because some things were just too ashamed to speak. So sure. I always tell people, journal, get it out. You don't have to speak it, but just get it out on paper or something, because it remains toxic if it stays inside of us.
Right. I am a huge proponent of journaling.
Right. Oh my gosh, I have so many journals. It's not even funny. So anyway, and so that was so helpful. And even when I started writing this story, it's my story, the book I wrote, but I wrote it in a fiction genre. And I just kind of dug back through my journals, trying to get the pieces for the character Marcia in my story. And I was shocked. We forget a lot because I had no reason to go back and look at it, right? Sure. It's like, I don't really want to revisit that. I know that happened to me, but I needed to do that in order to write this story as a resource for survivors. And my desire in writing this book was, first of all, I didn't really have resource like this when I went through my own healing. There was, other than my therapist, I didn't have any survivor groups, anyone I could talk to. And I wanted people to know they're not alone. And the other part of the story that I wanted them to do is just for people to see what it's like for someone to recall memories, childhood trauma in their adult life, the process and what they have to go through to heal. And I hope that in reading, I met her before, it will allow the reader to see themselves, and that will give them the courage to heal. Because I believe in the power of story.
Oh, yeah.
Right?
Yeah. The power of story is huge.
It's huge.
Yeah, I'm always telling people you've got to tell your story, whether it's in your journal, it's to a therapist, it's to a friend.
Right.
I don't care who it's to a teddy bear. Tell your story, get it out of your head.
Yes. Yes.
Because when we, like you said, when we keep it inside of us, it becomes toxic and it makes us sick mentally, physically, emotionally. We're unwell, and we've got to get that toxicity out.
Yeah. I have a sibling right now that has so many physical health issues, and I know it's because of the emotional pain.
Right.
And it's one of the things when I would share at workshops, just the psychosomatic illnesses, that you go to the doctor and they've done every kind of test imaginable. They can't find anything wrong with you. And I said, that's something to explore. Maybe there's something emotionally that is unresolved and needs to be addressed.
Yeah.
And I've had some people go through that process and their physical illness left.
Yep, absolutely.
So it's amazing how interconnected our body is, right?
Yeah. I have a faint memory of being around age 5 and having one of my uncle's friends kiss me. Very faint memory. It's actually almost more of a feeling than a memory. And I asked my uncle about it one time. I was like, did he ever do anything to me? He's like, not that I ever know, because I'd killed him.
Right.
I don't care if it was my best friend or not. So that's something that I've never really dealt with, because I don't know if it actually happened or if it's, but then part of me says, why would I make something like that up?
Yes. And I would lean toward that question.
Exactly. But I still haven't quite dealt with it. And that's something that I need to.
And, and I always tell people, you will know the time. Right?
Yeah.
Because the healing thing is so layered, right? And it's not linear. So it's amazing how certain things, and my daughter got a certain age, something would come up, surface. And when things surface, I go like, it's not like I hadn't done any healing. It's just, okay, this is another aspect healing I need to look at and resolve. A lot of people think because they've gone through some healing and then a couple of years later, something comes up, a life situation, and that triggers something, they think, oh my gosh, it's like I didn't even go through healing, but they have. You have gone through healing to that capacity, but now there's another layer.
Right.
And I don't think personally that we have the capacity to face everything at one time that needs to be faced. And I'm not so sure that everything needs to be faced. I feel like there's certain key components in the healing that need to be faced, because within that memory, within that trauma is what develops maybe an alter, a part, or a false belief, right? And so then that false belief needs to come to the light, because our life is being flushed out through that lens or that belief, right? And so in order to heal, we've got to bring that false belief to the light and replace it. And, I had a lot of rejection and abandonment issues, right? So some of my relationship issues with my husband kind of filter through those lenses until I, received a more healing. So it's just it's an engine, and I'm not going to say I know a lot. I just know what I've been through, and I've done reading, and I just feel like the brain has so much capacity to keep us alive, right? To keep us going in this world. And I feel like at this point in my life, I was telling my husband, I have done so much with the sexual trauma, which he's grateful for, because, I don't know if you've talked to other sexual abuse survivors and stuff, but usually the trauma of child sexual abuse is either like you become promiscuous or the other, you're frigid.
Right.
And so I went frigid, my poor husband. And so I could have done without sex and been completely fine in this world.
Poor guy.
Poor guy. So he told me when I was on the podcast and they had asked me questions. He said, next time you make sure you say, he's so funny. He says, make sure you tell them that it's made a world of difference in our sex life after you went through healing.
Yeah.
You don't even know what you're missing. You don't even know the beauty of what sex can be in an intimate relationship when someone has ripped that from you,
right.
has taken that innocence from you. And so your context of sex is dirty. I'm bad, right?
Mm-hmm.
So so I told him, I said, honey, I got really upset after I realized how much I was robbed, and so I said, oh God, you've got to give us sex till our 80s, make it good. You know what I
mean? Why stop in the 80s?
Right? So I told my husband, make it good. But it just does rob you of so much. And go ahead.
Oh, no, I was agreeing with you. It absolutely does. I went the opposite route and became promiscuous.
Okay.
And, and I looked for love.
Mm-hmm.
I equated sex with love.
Mm-hmm.
And also I equated that with my worth. Yeah. All these guys want me. That must mean I am beautiful and amazing, and I equated that with my worth. So,
yes,
it wasn't until I was in a very, not even my first couple of marriages, because those again were more of those were in my 20s. I didn't know what the heck I was doing.
Mm-hmm.
Wasn't until I was really in, a strong committed relationship as a mature adult that I finally was able to experience what it truly meant to make love to somebody.
Yes.
Yes. Because I did have that ripped away from me when I was raped.
Yeah,
and and it, like you said, it's a truly beautiful thing when you are with somebody that you love deeply and loves you back, and it's a whole different experience.
It is. Love is different. Making love is different just having sexual act, right?
Yeah.
It's not the same thing. And it is. I'm so glad that you've been able to reach that point.
Me too.
To experience that, right? Oh my gosh. Yeah. I was like, it was so bad for me. I couldn't even experience orgasms, right?
Yeah.
And then when I did, I could count on one hand, and all the years my husband were together, I would sob afterwards. Really sob. And he just thought he did a great job, And I just
I'm so good. I moved her to tears.
So good. I know. So, I just was like, no, babe, it's not it, but I didn't want to bust his bubble. So,
right.
So yeah, it's just, it's a beautiful thing now. And we've been on it, and I think it's amazing sometimes how you select your partners when you're broken, right? We tend to, our brokenness, we find another broken person. And I think all of us are broken to some degree if we've lived on this earth for any period of time.
Oh, absolutely.
Okay, right? But some more broken than others. And my husband and I, our family dysfunction was so similar. It's like we were magnets. And so both of us have had to go through inner healing and, that type of thing, and for trauma and stuff. And I will say it makes a difference in the relationship. Makes a big difference if even if one goes through it, but even better if both. And you don't necessarily have to go through it together, but you got to do that individual work,
right?
Healing work, right? Yeah.
So absolutely.
Yeah. So
this has been fun. Thank you so much for coming on and being open and honest with us about your your story. And there was, a few good nuggets in there that I'm sure listeners could take away. I know I picked up on a couple.
Great.
So thank you. Where can we find you?
I have a website, chandramoyer.com, and you can find me on Instagram. My book, I Met Her Before, is on Amazon, and I'm also on Facebook. So if you Google me on any of those, you can find Chandra Moyer.
Okay, perfect. And listeners, you know what I'm going to say. Everything is going to be down in the show notes. If you're listening from one of our partner stations, go to releasingtraumapodcast.com, pull up Chandra's show, and everything will be right there for you in one neat little section. So thank you so much again. And listeners, as always, thank you for tuning in. We'll talk to you on the next show.